Hey there. Today we're excited to partner up with Uiflow to run through a series of how to build scalable web applications using Xano and Uiflow. I'm lucky enough today to have Matt on the call with us, who's one of the senior solutions engineer for Uiflow. Did you want to introduce yourself, Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Lachlan. I'm Matt, Senior Solutions Engineer here at Uiflow. I work with a lot of our customers and how to make them successful using our product. And so I'm excited to share this CRM use case and starting to build out the basics for Uiflow and Xano.
Yeah, quite fitting. My name is Lucky, or Lachlan. A lot of people call me Lucky, and I'm a developer advocate for Xano. So, really, like Matt, my role is to make sure that the users of the platform have a good experience and that there's limited friction with how to get started with the platform and then how to continue to build your applications with Xano. Today, as mentioned, we're going to start the process of running through how to build an application. And in today's session, we're going to show you the basics of really connecting Xano and Uiflow to begin using the two platforms together. I guess before we get started, for those that are new to either Uiflow or Xano, we wanted to give you a bit of an idea around why would you use platforms like Uiflow and Xano together. And one of the big reasons for that is software today is really composed of two key components. You've got the front end, which is what the user sees, which Uiflow is a visual-based front-end web app development tool. So they allow you to build complex front-end web apps without needing to understand code, but they also extend their platform out with allowing you to use code as well. So it's both a developer friendly and a sort of low code friendly platform to use. Whereas Xano, we only cover the back end. So essentially, we cover all the logic behind the scenes, which is a server, a database that stores your data, and then we have APIs that you can then use to expose your data and allow platforms like Uiflow to connect with those APIs to pull that data to the front end. And the reason why these platforms pair so well together is having a decoupled front end and back end really makes the development process quite a bit easier. And if you look at traditional development stacks, you'll quite often see that for larger companies, you do have a dedicated front end development team and a dedicated back end development team. Having a decoupled front end and back end really just gives you a clear definition of where does the back end stop and the front end finish. And this really allows for you to have, I guess, an easier development process where a potential blocker or a halt in one component, whether it be the front and the back end, doesn't necessarily slow down the entire development process. So we found that companies that are using these decoupled stacks, particularly as they scale, find that using multiple combinations of softwares together really reduces that, potential blockers that people experience during the development process. A quick overview of Xano. We have a whole range of different users that use our platform, from no coders through to large organizations. Some of the big benefits of why no coders use Xano is we have a complete no code API builder. So this allows you to not just use or interact with external APIs, but to produce and build your own API endpoints, which allows platforms such as Uiflow to connect with your database in your backend. We also have a flexible database, which allows you to have as many records as you like, and the ability to schedule automations as well. So any critical business tasks that need to run whilst you sleep, you can schedule those automations to happen inside of Xano. Importantly, we also have a scalable managed server, which essentially Xano's your backend partners that are covering the hosting of your servers for you and all the DevOps behind the scenes. And we allow you to connect with any front end, such as platforms like Uiflow. What we are also seeing as well is large organizations are shifting towards using platforms like Uiflow and Xano as well, as it's demonstrating significant time and cost savings. And the reason why large organizations are shifting to platforms like Xano is, importantly, we've built our platform upon architecture that can scale. So we have built everything on the Google Cloud platform using Docker, Kubernetes, and a Postgres SQL database. And whilst we do have a whole range of no-code tools, we understand the needs of businesses at scale. And for traditional developers, we also like to call ourselves developer-friendly as well. So within our function stack, we can bring in JavaScript with their Lambda functions. We've also got microservices. If you already have your current Docker microservices, you can bring them across into Xano, caching, and also cloud portability as well. So if you do have a particular needs for enterprise packages, you can bring your own cloud as well. And we importantly also have a whole range of compliance metrics as well. So we're GDPR compliant. You can also have HIPAA compliance with your database as well. And we've also just received SOC 2 and ISO 27001. So beyond just having a scalable platform, we also have, I guess, the security and compliance required to know that building your application on Xano means that you won't just have a scalable platform, but also a secure application as well. Matt, if you'd like to run through some of, I guess, the benefits of a platform like Uiflow.
Yeah, so Uiflow is really focused on collaborative front-end web app development experience. So specifically, as we'll see in our demo, we have different workspaces for your designers or your engineers to really build out the logic portions of your application. Some of the other benefits with Uiflow is specifically when we're talking about larger organizations, you have your own infrastructure for how you want to deploy your application. So um, Lachlan also mentioned Docker, so we also have the ability to kind of export your application as a Docker image, and then allows you to host that on premises or wherever your environment and infrastructure is. So then the other big philosophy with Uiflow specifically is we believe that you should have the full control in flexibility in both designing and as well as these bottom portions into building out your front end logic applications. So we have components for you to where you can insert your own custom JavaScript, as well as we offer a CLI where you can create your own custom components. So it allows you to really gives you another way of, say you hit a roadblock in with no code. This is a way for you to really not have any blockers, and that's one of our, as I mentioned, a big philosophy with UI flows. We don't want any limitations in this no code space for building your front end web application.
Yeah, I think that's the big trend we're seeing is, really people, businesses are now looking at no code, not just as a platform to, I guess, build an MVP on. They're not looking at it as a tool to be able to build your organization around. And really because it's not just the platform, it's the time savings and the collaborative features that they're able to then, have a much better control over the development process with more people working on it at the same time. So we're certainly seeing at Xano at the moment a large shift towards large organizations bringing in these no code or low code tools to just improve their workflows. Today, I think I'm first going to get started by running through the backend required to set up a CRM. So we're going to run through the database schema. We're also going to run through the APIs that are required before connecting to Uiflow. So kind of getting into that now, when you first sign into Xano, we've already got our instance set up, but you'll be greeted with your dashboard. We're going to jump straight into our database. And there is three key components or four key components to Xano. You've got your database where you store all your data. You've got your APIs, which is what your public endpoints or your private endpoints is where you can expose your database to other applications. We then also have tasks, which allows you to set those recurring automations as well. For today, we're going to run through the database where we're going to show the data and the schema that we're using for the CRM application. Then we're going to also run through the APIs that we've created that Matt is then going to connect with on the front end to pull the data into our interface that we're going to create. So really straightforward. There is a few other tables here, but please ignore these. The core components of what we're going to use today is the deal and the contact. As essentially we're going to be creating a sales CRM, which allows you to have a particular deal and progress that through stages to ultimately win or lose that deal. Within a deal, we have quite a few different data types. And importantly, we've got firstly a contact that is referenced. So we've got a table relationship with our contacts. We then also have the title of the deal, which we've used really elaborate names, deal A, deal B, deal C, to keep it nice and straightforward. We've got the value, how much money they're going to potentially make from that deal, the currency, and the stage, which you can add as many different fields as you like or different data types to Xano. We've got a whole range of different fields inbuilt. And based on your application's needs, you'll need to set up a schema that relates to, obviously, its particular requirements. But because this is already pre-set up, I won't go into too much details of setting up the table today. But firstly, our deals table is going to, we're going to bring that across. And we also have our contacts, which is essentially all the potential potential clients that, the user is going to have. The one last table we are going to use as well is actually the user table as well, because as part of this process, we'll be needing to essentially add authentication to our application. We're going to need to make sure that the users of the system can only see data that's specific to them as well. But we'll cover that in later sessions. One thing that is nice is you can view your table relationships in Xano by clicking the button at the top right here. We can see straight away how that we have this relationship between our contacts and our deals, meaning that a deal has a contact within it that we're referencing. So if that doesn't make sense just yet, bear with us. So essentially the database is our first component, which we've now got set up. And within each data table, we have the data items that we're going to bring across to our front end. And how we do that is we then need to utilize an API or an application programming interface, which is essentially the connector between two software platforms, whether it be your front end, your back end, and alternate software. APIs are how the internet or applications talk to each other. And with Xano, you're able to create your own custom endpoints. And out of the box, actually, when you create a new data table, Xano provides you with some default CRUD endpoints, which are create, read, update, and delete. So from the moment of creating your instance, you then instantly deploy the APIs, meaning that out of the box, you can have your front end begin connecting with your back end straight away. What is also nice, though, is these endpoints that are created on your behalf, you can also then customize them as well to only provide you the data that you want. But Matt, what's the first endpoint we're going to use today to essentially run through the
Yeah.
demonstration?
Yeah, the first part will be is the contacts. Contacts, so we'll be making kind of contact cards to display on the front end.
Perfect. And we'll be bringing across all the contacts.
Yep, we'll bring out all the contacts in their own card so you can see certain details for each one of them.
Excellent. So I presume with that one, we're going to be using the query or contacts record endpoint. Per-
Absolutely. Yep, correct.
Perfect. So just to explain a little bit about what's happening with these endpoints is essentially this is what we call our function stack builder. And when you're creating an API endpoint, you've got firstly at the very top is whether this is a public endpoint or a private endpoint. So does the endpoint need authentication? For our first session, we're not going to cover authentication. We're going to cover that in a later session. So for now, we've got these as a public endpoint. But then what you're able to do is you're able to include inputs. And this is essentially the information that you want to send from your front end to your back end that's going to allow you to then either add that information into your database or use that information as part of your function that you want to run. Because we're creating all records at the moment, we haven't got any inputs required because if we run this, we're going to get all the records from our contact table and we're going to return that variable as the output. So if we run this, we can see that we get a list of all the different contacts that we want to be using on our front end as a response from this API. So each time Uiflow contacts this endpoint, it's going to receive this list. And really, I guess that's the starting point's worth of data as to what we need to get started building. So I'm going to pass it over to Matt, who's going to now, with this API endpoint that we've created in Xano, how do we start to use this data in Uiflow and how can we connect our front end to then display this information?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Lachlan. So now, as I mentioned, we're going to transition to the UI flow portion of this. So, what you're going to build your front end application with those APIs. So I'll start with just giving a brief overview of UI flow. So this is you create. We're starting from a blank starter app template. So there's nothing happening in this app, and so we'll go from scratch. And so now you clicked into this Uiflow Studio platform. So this is the actual application platform where we'll be building, and it's split into three main workspaces, as we mentioned before. So we're in our design workspace, and then we have a connect workspace. This is where we'll add our data connections. So specifically, we'll add our Xano API, and then we have a logic workspace. This is where we will we'll see the Uiflow programming language and where you will actually be connecting the data to our UI and our designs and adding any additional logic that we want to have happen in our application. So the first thing we're going to do is just put in a basic design of what we want our application to look like. So on this left side is where we have our drag and drop droppable components. In this middle portion is the preview of what your design looks like statically. And then on this right side is where you'll see page properties as well as specific styling of your application. So I'm going to start by dragging in. Actually, I'm gonna toggle over. So we have our components. I didn't mention we have patterns. So if you toggle over to patterns, we have some pre-built patterns here that can just help you get started off the ground. They're just pre-built set of components. So I'll grab just a sidebar just to give me a starting point of a sidebar. And then I'm going to add a container. And so I want this container is gonna be my main body. So right now I'll see that they are all aligned vertically. So one thing I want to do here is going to change that layout. So I'll switch over from my adding on this left side of my sidebar, switch over to my layers so I can see the full design layers of my application, my design tree. And so I'll select my home. And then on this right side is where you can actually add your custom styling. This is where you actually edit that. And so you'll see which component you have selected in this top right portion. So I see that I have my home page selected. I'm going to open my layout. And instead of columns, I actually want that to be rows. I want them to be aligned to the top left as well. So I'm just going to change that there. And then I'm going to reorder it. So my sidebar is on my left side. And then I have my container here. And so now I can see that I have my container selected. So I'm going to make my size this fill container on both height and width. And for kind of best practices of building and maintenance wise, you're going to want to name your components. So you can do that by just double clicking up here. And I can say main body container.
I definitely forget to
So
name
now
my
that I have,
components, so that's a
yeah,
good tip. It gets easier as you continue to build out the application to quickly reference what they mean. So I definitely second that tip.
yeah, I would say it's really important. It's easier to do it as you go too, instead of having to go back and try to name them all.
Totally.
Especially when we get to the logic portion, it's going to be important when you are referencing that specific component. It's going to be even more important. So I would recommend um, naming your components as you go, even if it's just shorthand, just some kind of convention.
Totally.
Perfect. So now that we have this body container, we're going to go back and select this add. So this opens up our component catalog again. And we're just going to build a basic repeating instance for each one of our contacts. So the repeating instance component in Uiflow is a collection component. So I can just click and drag in this collection. And I'm going to make this size fill container. So I want my collection to be the full container. I want it to then also fill the height. And I want my layout. So instead of being columns or rows, we also have this other option for grid. And so this allows you to really pick how many columns that you want based on uh, how many objects you get back. And I'm actually just going to click autofill. And what this does is it gives you essentially responsiveness automatically. You don't have to necessarily go to your custom breakpoints, which you can do at the top if you want to change your design based on the breakpoint. But autofill will also do that automatically. It has that built-in functionality. So you really only have to set like what you want the minimum pixel amount to be. So I'll put 400. And then for the column spacing, for in between each card, I'll select 12. And I'll do 12 as well, just for columns and rows. So now inside of my collection is what you want. You're going to design what each instance you want. So what you want this card to look like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag in a container, and I want this one to be full width. And I'm going to then drag in some text. So drag in a text component. And so this one is going to be just my kind of contact name, not company name. I want that to be contact name. And so I'm renaming it up here. So I can do that by double clicking. I also, if you have, I did a shorthand. If you have that component selected, you can also do Command R, and that will also bring you up there. You can start typing. So then I'm going to just do a duplicate this. So I can duplicate this component, and I'm going to make this one email. That's what I want to do. So I'm just going to make this one email text. And so we have our email and our company one. And then I want one more. So I want these ones to be stacked, which is correct. So I have my contact and my email, but I also want the company that they're a part of. So I'm going to add a container here at the bottom, make this one fill container the width. And I want this one to have the company title and then the phone numbers, like a contact. So I'm going to make this a row, and I'm going to put some, make them actually, put some, I'll make them space between. So what this is going to do is going to use automatically use the full width of the container. So I'm going to drag in another text element. I'm going to name this one company name.
It
And
looks
then
like
I can
you've
do
got
the same thing.
so many different visual options to customize the items exactly how you want. It's seems super powerful. Your layout options, and there's yeah, so many options. I really like the interface as well. It looks quite fluid to use.
Yeah, no, it's great. And so there's a couple different ways to do it as well. I'm using this right side just as a preference, specifically for the custom styles. The other option you have when you have this item selected, you'll see this little menu here. These also correspond to the styles and then your state. So the state kind of tab is really the specific configuration related to that component. So it's a stuff you can, it's configuration that you can set like kind of defaults as well as any of item configurations. You also have the ability to set dynamically, and we'll do that in the Logic workspace. But so if you wanted to change the styles here of the font, you also have that option just directly from this little kind of quick access menu.
Nice.
So, yeah, so I'm going to do one more kind of duplicate here. So I have the company name, and then I also want the company phone number. Let's do that. So now that I have my, make sure I'm selecting the right container. Yep. So I have my container, and I'm going to name this one just this is the full contact card. And we can go back and design and change any designs that you want after the fact. So we may pop back in, but we have a basic design of the different text that we're going to dynamically update. So now what I want to do is I'm going to move over to my Connect workspace or Connect tab. So this brings you to our connections catalog. And this is where we're going to add our Xano connection. So I will click add a new data connection, and you have your options for any REST API. So we mentioned any other backend services. If you scroll down, we have some pre-built ones, and specifically we'll add a Xano database connection. And so now what this is doing is bringing us into our building your connection component. So on this left side, we have specifically our Xano database API. So you can name what this kind of connection name is. And then you need the API specifically for Xano. There's some configurations that help make this a little easier. So if I pop over to my Xano API group that Lachlan was explaining how these you get out of the box for free. So this makes it very easy. And so we're looking for the group base URL. You can just quickly copy that, pop back over to Uiflow, and paste it in our API base URL. And then so we have different actions. So Lachlan also mentioned different CRUD components. So that will also correspond to list being your query, you adding if you need to add a record to your database, delete, as well as get a specific record or edit a specific record. So I'm going to do list, which is going to correspond to kind of the query, that query endpoint that we have. And so I'm going to name this, and you'll see this action is also corresponds to a specific component preview in this right side. So you're actually building your connection component in this configuration screen. So I'm going to name this one get all contacts. And you'll see that it's changing the name. It's also naming my component. And so all what we need here is the table or the endpoint is contact. I know that. So I'm looking at this contact endpoint. And if, as Lachlan also mentioned, this is a public endpoint for now, but if we did want to authenticate that, we could also grab pass in an auth token. So when we do want to add that authentication, um, we can have that here.
We'll
Um,
certainly come
this
back
one
to that in another
specifically,
session.
yeah, we will. So we'll get into that later. But just to maybe test that I have my correct URL and table, I can click send here, similar to how in in Xano you had the run and debug. Similar experience here. So you'll see that I was successful, and I can see the response directly in this preview, and I can see that I'm seeing exactly the same data. So that's great, and I'm done with now building this component. I have my component here. So now I'm going to, in this bottom right side, publish this to our logic workspace saying, hey, this is done. And so now this brings us into our logic workspace. So this is where now we're actually going to connect that data response to the design that we actually have. And this is going to specifically use our visual programming language in our logic workspace. So how it really works, like the basics of this logic language is you have different triggers, like a specific event, and then what do you want to have happen on that specific trigger? And the easiest way to really replicate that is you'll see our design references here. So these are the components in your design workspace that you had there, and that's why I would say reiterate naming convention because you see the specific names here when you in this space. So you can either click and drag this in to your logic flow. So what we're doing is creating our logic flow. And as I mentioned, this basic idea of the foundation of the language is you have these nodes, and what we'll do is we'll be connecting these nodes. So I have my home page, and I have essentially an on-page event. So this is going to be my trigger. And what I want to do is now in my logic component library, similar to design, I have this new Xano database APIs component. So I have this component that I created. And so what I can do is say on page load, I'm going to click and I'm going to drag to call. So I'm going to say on page load, I want to call this API. And so these nodes do have the symbolism there. So they do have meaning. The circle that has the additional circle outside of it are your events and your triggers. So your specific trigger point. So on page load is an event, that's the trigger. And then the API is the call. So we're calling this API. And then I'm going to now drag in my collection. So you'll see that this one is a little bit unique in that it has the dotted lines on the outside. And that represents that this is the repeating instance component. So what it takes in is an array of objects or an array of any kind of array. And then for each item in that array, it's going to create that instance in our application. So I'm going to say I saw that in my response in my Connect workspace that I'll just do another kind of quickly show it here, that the response is an array. So I can see that. So it's already in the correct format. That's perfect that that Xano out of the box does that. And if we did need to update that or change the response, we could do that in Xano. We can get into that later as well, I'm sure. So I'm going to say on a successful API call, I'm going to set the items, and the items themselves is going to be the response. And so what I can do is I open up my page preview, and I can see, oops, I can do a quick refresh, and I'll see that now doesn't look doesn't look pretty, but we can see that there was a repeating instance. Um, we have multiple cards here, so we have one instance, two, three, four, and so those are the 5 instances that we're getting back from our response, and I can see that directly in this logic flow panel as well. But we didn't actually set which or do that mapping of which response item to which specific text in the UI. So we do that by double clicking into our collection. And that essentially brings us into this context of one instance. And so what I really want to do is I want to set the contact name. So I'll drag in my contact name, drag in my email. And so you can do it individually. You can also multi-select using Command or Shift. I can drag both of those in at the same time. And I'm like organizing these, so I can lasso select them and just arrange them all vertically, which is also good for organizing and keeping a kind of a clean
Nice pro hack there.
logic panel.
Definitely think that
Yeah,
makes it easier to view.
pro tip. Yeah, especially when you think about larger flows and logic flows, it is
I can
helpful
only
to kind
begin
of
to
organize
imagine.
them.
Yeah, I could get some pretty complicated sort of views here.
Yeah, because you kind of tying that back is like we do want have you'd have the ability to build any kind of logic flows that you want. You don't have any limitations necessarily other than that foundation of the trigger and then what you want to have happen.
Yeah,
So
and then the fact that you can
um,
visualize it and play with it and drag it and see it all happening is awesome. Particularly when it comes to like paths, right? So we'll get back to
mhm.
that. But we had on success and then on fail. It seems so easy to create. If it goes good, if it goes bad, you can create a pop up element saying API call failed or something on the error, as opposed to on success, it's going to return the value. So looks super simple to be able to create complex logic based on if this happens, then that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, yeah, so I'm coming back into this collection. So one other thing that you can do that we have the ability, so um, on the item itself, so we can see the data in our flow panel. And so what we can do here, we see the last object that was, or last item. And we know that we actually only want the first name and the last name, email, phone, and company. So what we're doing is we can checkbox these specifically, and you'll see that they created these nodes here. So we can then just easily directly drag in this part of the response to our text element. So what I can do here is I'll say, when we construct every item, I want to set the label, the text, and for this one specifically, we have a first name and a last name. So I'm going to go into our logic library and look for a concatenation. Yep, so we have a concatenation component. You drag that in, and so I want to concatenate the first name, then the last name, and so now we have our that quick access menu as before, but now we see a lightning icon. So this is specifically our component actions. Um, so this one specifically is only kind of you're defining what you want to separate them. So I want to go into our configuration, so our state, and I'm just going to put a space. So I can just tap a space for I want to separate by a space, and then the output is what I actually want the contact name to be. So I'm going to then do that for the rest of my elements. So I want to set the email, want the specific email response to be there, the company name, and then also the phone number. So now if I were to do a refresh here, I'll see that now I have the data displaying specifically for each card. And so we can go back and update the design of it. But a couple things with this logic workspace in our flows is when you click preview in here, it, you'll see the flows light up in yellow as they're happening. So if you wanted to debug and troubleshoot a specific flow, you can also, so if I were to refresh this again, so I can do that with the little reload here. You'll see that very quickly it went from on-page load to now the last. You had a successful API call, and the response is in here as well.
That's
So
awesome.
this is one way, yeah, one way to preview it in this little side part. The other way to preview it is this little play button. You can play this in a new window. And if you wanted to see kind of the full um, how it looks on a full tab. You'll see that we didn't add very much kind of design, so we would want to go back and do this. But one quick note of the design when we did the autofill. So this is where we automatically get that responsiveness. So you'll see the columns and the rows automatically happen. You don't have to think about that if you use that autofill grid.
What I really liked is that you've taken the back end data and you've been able to work with that data. So the concat be able to manipulate the data to take both the first name and the last name means that if there is a particular call you get from Xano or any external API, you can still then manipulate that data how you need on the front end to then display it in a particular format. So sometimes if it's not possible in the back end or for some reasons you prefer not to, you can also front end filter and control the data you see as well. So it's yeah, super powerful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm going to do just like a quick um, make the design a little bit more defined here. So I can go back into my design workspace. There's a couple ways, kind of other small things here. So if I go into my design workspace, I'm going to click my container here with my company. I didn't really like that the info is really fully packed or like the company info. So I'm going to actually change that layout to just be packed so that they're closer together. And I want the text, these text sizes to be full. So instead of it being left corner, right corner is now left and middle. Um, and so I did that just by changing the container to still be full width, but instead of having it space between, which will take up the entire container left and right, I just make that packed and update the text sizing. So that's one. And then I also want to add just some small styling to my contact card. So I want to add a border. So I see I have my contact card selected. I want my border, I want it to be kind of softer edges. So I want there to be, say, curved edges, and I want there to be a width of 1. And I want them to actually have some padding in between as well. So I'll add like 12 pixels on every corner. So I have my card there now. I want this to be there. So now I can see that I have my card. Um, and now if I were to kind of pop that out, preview from any workspace, you can see that there are now more well-defined cards. And I don't have my phone numbers on the far right. And so you can always kind of adjust these designs as you go, but the data is still connected. So when I mentioned that the works design and logic are different workspaces, they are also um, decoupled in the sense of I can rearrange these if I wanted my phone number to come first or rearrange however the design is. That is completely independent of the logic because they're just references to the component itself. So you can rearrange your design and your logic remains intact. So that's where you can have different collaborations. Designer can work in here or engineer can work on the logic. And that's really something that we really pride ourselves on.
Wow, that's so powerful. I mean, within a moment, you can imagine how many different pieces of data you can show there. So we've already got contacts showing with a simple CRM setup as well. I mean, the next step is then to add deals as well. But
Mhm.
such a simple process to be able to use that inbuilt data connector with Xano. Simply add the base URL, name the table, and then to start using that data in a moment. It's that's pretty powerful.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we could kind of tweak the designs as we go. But I think the main really thing we were really trying to show here is that you have that connection. You could have a very successful kind of first connecting your Xano database and build a simple UI to start. And then the the fun part about this is then you can continuously iterate this very quickly. And because we're just you change your design of this one card and it's within the collection for that repeating instance, it's going to be applied to every single instance. You don't kind of like cherry pick or have to design every instance. It gets applied to all of them. So you'll see that, yeah, I made it a change to the border color. So I can just do another kind of quick refresh now. You can quickly live see how that looks, how um, specifically in this preview.
That's it. So it's obviously not as dark, but I think that's a good starting point. And now this is the first session of multiple sessions. So we're going to continue building out this CRM to touch on some more points as well. We've covered basic taking some data from Xano, how to then display that in Uiflow, but that's just the beginning, right? How would we then turn this into an application which will contain users, how do users log in, and how can we control the process of actually making this an application that you could then publish and release to your users? But I guess that's the next session. So we'll be adding some more in the coming weeks as well. But this is our first session. I hope you're able to gather some value from connecting the session, the two softwares together. And as mentioned, yeah, please feel free to leave any comments about what you'd like us to cover in the comments below. And we'll come back to you with further sessions around how to really build a fully scalable web app using both Uiflow and Xano. But thanks for your time today, Matt. I'm looking forward to the next session.
Yeah, no, thank you as well. I'm glad we got this easily set up as the foundation.
Certainly. Thanks so much for watching as well. See you all next time.
Yeah, thanks everyone.